right, I have the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And yeah, we're just going to jump right in because we have a lot of good information to share with you all today. And hopefully you all will have some questions that you can put in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. Our webinar today is Post-Audit Success, Appeals, Root Cause, and Corrective Actions. So with me today is Jennifer Lott. She is the Technical Development Director for Food at SGS North America. You all can read all the wonderful things about her on the screen. She does specialize in food and product safety management systems. She knows all things certification, training, project management, and she's got a lot of things that she enjoys in her in her spare time, which being in certification, sometimes you may not get too much of, but you know, hiking, volunteering, love creating recipes from leftovers. That's one of my favorites for sure. And then always spending time with family. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tammy Van Buren. I'm the compliance manager here at Safe Quality Food Institute. My background is primarily in quality. However, the last 11 or 12 years, I have been in food safety, and the last 5 years here with SQFI. And so we're going to, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer. Let her talk to you a little bit about SGS before we get started with our topics.
Thank you, Tammy. Just real briefly, SGS is the world's oldest and largest certification testing and inspection company that has never been sold or acquired. They started out in 1878 with grain inspections and then diversified into verification and testing services in the mid-20th century. Today, we're 140 plus years old. We're a global company with over 100,000 employees with what we like to say boots on the ground wherever your company needs them most. Next slide. This slide is kind of busy, but really what I want to impress here is that SGS can provide solutions from farm to fork, covering primary production to transportation, processing, retail, and food service. So a lot of details there, but that's kind of the highlight.
Yeah. So whatever you need, SGS has a solution for. So if you're looking for a certification body or some training, you know, definitely check out what SGS has to offer. So today we're going to cover a couple topics. So we're going to talk about appeals and root cause and corrective actions. So, you know, you've had your audit, you know, the auditors left the building. You know, we like to say that your appeals should be submitted as soon as possible. And just as a reminder, corrective actions still have to be submitted until your appeals approved. So, you know, submit that appeal as soon as possible. And then we're going to touch on that root cause and corrective action process. You know, SQF says 30 days until closeout. So what that means is the auditor has 30 days to close out that corrective action process. And so the site will have less than that to get those submitted. So making sure that you get those submitted as soon as possible. I was always a day 29 girl, and I don't recommend that because, you know, you want to give the auditor sufficient time to review them. And then Jennifer pointed out to me yesterday, we should remind you all that, you know, there is the possibility for an extension to your corrective actions if there's a capital expenditure that's involved, because we all know that getting a capital expenditure approved in 30 days, probably not going to happen, right, Jennifer?
Right. And to your point about the timing, Tammy, at SGS, we ask for corrective action in 21 days because that gives us a week to review them and come back and say, yep, these are good. Or no, we need a little more detailed information, and we're meeting the expectation of 30 days to close out.
Exactly. So follow your certification body. So whatever they have outlined for you in the contract. So for SGS, it's 21. And I know a lot of our CBs have various days, 23, 25, 27. So make sure you adhere to that because it's important. So let's just jump in. I'm going to hand it off to you to start the appeal discussion, Jennifer, because that's really where it starts, is with the certification body.
Correct. And what I have here is just a flow diagram that was taken out of SGS's global procedure for appeals. And, it's pretty straightforward. The communications received, and it could be by about one of the services we provided, or against a certification decision, or concerning a certified client. We respond within 2 weeks. We determine whether it's justified or not. If it's not justified, then there's no further action. If it's a justified appeal, we investigate, and then we notify you of the decision. And I have end here, but it really doesn't end. If you don't like what our decision is, SGS's, on the outcome of the appeal, you can always take it up with SQFI after that. But I really want to stress that we don't want to wait until the certification decision is made in order for an appeal to come in. So if you're not happy with the finding that's raised, or conduct of an auditor, or anything that you're just not happy with, we want to hear about it the next day. Because, to Tammy's point in the beginning, if you don't appeal it immediately, you're gonna have to put corrective action in place and take care of it, even if you don't feel that's a real finding. So communicate immediately, let us get working on it so that we can make a decision before you have to take corrective action on something that may not be a real finding after the investigation.
Exactly. We're getting ready to do edition 10. So one of the items on my list was, do we need to put a timeline in for appeals to be submitted? And I think that would provide some guidance to the sites if we said, you should have your appeal in within, a week or 10 days from the last day of the audit, just to help our sites, make sure that they are getting their appeals in on time to give everybody adequate time to look at it. And as Jennifer said, the appeal can come to SQF if you don't like what your CB decided. And so on our website, you can go and find appeals, and it walks you through the process. There's an online appeal form that you will see on there. And the one thing we require is that you submit the denial by the CB so that we know you've given your certification body ample time and opportunity to review it first, because it really does start with the certification body. So again, we will take a look at it and get your response back in a timely manner. But yeah, there's lots to the appeal process that I'll tell you, I was an SQF certified site, and I really didn't understand that appeal process. It just didn't occur to me that I could question a non-conformance. So I think it's a great thing to have. All right, so CAPA process, the one topic that I feel like is probably one we need to focus on more than most others. And it's one area where we just see our sites struggle a lot. So I wanted to lay out for you a couple different ways to look at it. So Plan, Do, Check Act. I'm sure a lot of you all have heard about that process. So I kind of put that problem solving process into a PDCA cycle. And there's a lot of planning going on. And as you can see, most of the work is in the planning section where you're looking at the problem, describing it. But today we're going to talk about those two things that are bulleted there: identify and verify the root cause, and develop a solution and action plan. And then if you're a linear thinker, here's the process as well. So it all starts with requirements or expectations, and then you identify a problem. And so it could be one that the auditor identified. It could be an issue that you found during your internal audit, or, CAP is a great continuous improvement tool. So, just identify the problem, implement a correction if applicable, and then look at that root cause and corrective action. And we're going to focus on those two things today. So let's jump into root cause analysis. So I've got our toolbox here. Jennifer, do you have a favorite problem-solving tool?
Yes, I think that when I look at what clients are doing and how they get to it best, 5 why really works well.
It does, 5 why is a good tried and true. Um, the first one I ever learned was fishbone diagram, so that's still near and dear to my heart. But really one of my favorites is Triz. So if you've never checked that one out, check that out because that's a great tool as well. But I guess the point of this is, it's not just one tool. There's lots of tools that you should have in your problem solving toolbox, and it's knowing when to apply the correct tool. Absolutely, if this chart or this slide kind of looks foreign to you and you haven't heard of many of those things, then I would encourage you to, check out some training on root cause analysis. I'm sure SGS has some. I know SQFI, has some available as well. So I just encourage you to expand your knowledge of corrective action and root cause analysis for sure. So today we're going to walk through an example of a 5 why. And I don't know about you, Jennifer, but I know there are certain things that always just come up. Do you have, one nonconformance that you just see more often, or that you feel like that everybody has a problem with? Is that, there aren't any new problems, I think. So what do you think?
When I think back to when I was auditing, and it's interesting that we're talking about Kappa, but I always seem to find that clients didn't verify the effectiveness of the actions they took very well. Sometimes they would say, oh yeah, I'll restate the root cause, and that's verification of effectiveness, and it isn't. So I think one of the findings that I wrote the most was verification of effectiveness of actions taken because it wasn't done well and it wasn't well understood.
Yeah, that's one area too that I tell our auditors and our CBs all the time that I'm surprised I don't see more nonconformances to that very thing.
Mhm.
Within the SQF code, we reference Kappa, I think it's 9 or 10 times. So that's 9 or 10 opportunities for an auditor to see the corrective action process start to finish. And so that verification, absolutely. I share an example of a time where I didn't verify something properly. And the customer called me back 6 weeks later and said, we've got the problem again. And I said, oh, no, absolutely not. I put in a solid corrective action and I'm certain that you do not have that problem again. And they actually did have the problem again. And, I learned something about laser degradation that I had never heard of, but it's a real thing. So verifying that effectiveness. So when you talk about verification, when do you recommend for sites to verify those corrective actions?
It depends on the action taken.
Okay.
So, you run into the situations where they may run a product once every month. So it might take a few months to get that verification in place. If they're running it every day or it's a process that happens frequently, then you can do it much quicker. So you have to really take a step back and holistically look at the process and understand when verification should happen. Because you can't verify after one. You have to run it a few times to make sure that it's truly an effective process.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. And I guess to sum that up, no two corrective actions are exactly the same. So, everything has to be looked at individually. So I know as sites that you all have within your corrective action process, that you should have, let me say it that way, you should have in your corrective action process a verification step. But it's hard to put a time frame on that. You can't just say 30 days or 60 days or 6 months. I agree with Jennifer. You really need to kind of fit it to whatever the problem was based on, how often you have an opportunity to verify that corrective action. So that's a great point. So
I also think it's important, Tammy, that they have timelines on when the corrective action needs to be completed so they don't get lost because we know how things shuffle to the bottom of the pile. but that verification step can push out like we were just talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at 5Y. Now, those of you that have heard me before, when I talk about 5Y, I talk about 5Y three ways. I came from the automotive industry, and they do corrective action fairly well. And one of the things that I took from that I think we really need to get the word out to the food industry is doing 5Y three ways. So, why did something occur? Why was it not detected? And why did the system allow it to happen? And for me, if you look at it that way, then you'll stay away from some of those common root causes that we come up with. Things like we just restate the problem. So the auditor wrote personal items were stored in the production area. So the root cause came in as the employee stored his personal items in the production area. So, yep, that's what the auditor said. So we see that. We also see where we get to root causes where we just are quick to blame employee error. What do you think about employee error? How do we get people to stop using that one, Jennifer?
When I see that in a system I'm auditing, I really probe and say, is it employee error or is it lack of training? Or is it something that you really can do something about? Because it's very hard to put a corrective action in place for employee error. But if we find that it's a training issue and it could become a systemic training issue, there are tons of actions you can take.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned training because what we see is a lot of sites, they just immediately go to training. Everything's a training error. And so that gets into my least favorite corrective action, which is retrain.
Right.
Because, you know, so what you're saying is you're going to do the exact same thing again, and you're going to expect different results.
Right.
That one's one I always push back on because if it is a training error, and there's some instances where that's a very valid root cause is a training error, but the corrective action should be fix the training.
Right. Is
Not
it effective training, right? And why isn't the training effective?
exactly. So, maybe a new training method. I know a lot of times we rely on putting an employee in a room and having them watch a video and then signing off that they were trained. But is that really effective? To use your word, do we need a different method? Sometimes a live instructor or a demonstration of something, if you want to train people how to wash their hands, demonstrate to them how to properly wash hands instead of having them watch a video of people they have no idea who they are. So no, great points here. So I just threw up an example of a 5Y, and I know this is one that's a common nonconformance. A gap at the bottom of a dock door. I see that quite often. It's almost like in every facility, you could probably find at least one door that has a gap around it. And so, I'm not sure how do we stop, stop the gaps in those dock doors. But just an example here that I put together for, if we were doing a 5Y on that. So why did it occur? And just the door is not touching the dock plate. And that kind of seems like an obvious one, right, Jennifer? I mean, that's obvious. So, but why wasn't it touching the dock plate? And so in my example, and I just, made something up, the door closing mechanism stopped short. Because I know in the past where I worked, we had a button that you hit and the door came down. And you just always trusted that the door was going to come down to where it was supposed to. And so in this case, the closing mechanism stopped short. So why did the closing mechanism stop short? Well, maybe the chain contained, dirt or debris or something that was just enough that the dock door, felt that little resistance, and so it stopped. Because, if you think about dock doors, they have something in there that keeps them from crashing into the dock plate. So they, So it could be something as simple as that. Please notice, I didn't go to 5 whys. Is that okay, Jennifer?
Mhm. It is okay
Yeah,
when you feel that you've gotten to the root cause, then you don't need to keep going. And if you've done 5 whys and you're still not there, you can make it 6, 7, or 8 whys, right?
exactly. There are no 5 why police out there that are gonna, hold you to exactly 5 whys. So, yeah, go to you get to a point to where you think you've asked why enough and you've got something actionable. So then on my why it wasn't detected, well, the operator pushed the button and walked away. I think I would do that. We trust that it's going to work. And so we just push the button and walk away. Well, why? Well, because it never didn't work before. So we had no reason not to trust it then. And then why? Because I put in there the operator relied on the mechanism to work, and then why? Because it hadn't never not worked. So we just trusted it. Um, what's some of the ways that you like to do a 5 why, Jennifer? I mentioned yesterday I like to use Post-it notes. So, how do you like to do a 5 why?
I always like to pull out the turtle diagram because with the turtle, I can look at people and processes and inputs and outputs. And when I look at this example, one of the gaps I see, Tammy, is we didn't ask, why did our GMP audit not catch this and why it wasn't working? So, we're focusing on equipment right now, but there's also processes and people and other things that might lead us to the right answer.
Exactly. And that's a great point because I think one of the biggest failures I see in root cause is we immediately blame inspection. So, why did back to the, why did the personnel, store their personal items in the production area? And a lot of people will say the root cause is because the GMP inspection didn't catch it. So I like doing 5 whys 3 ways because now we have a whole why tree devoted to why it wasn't detected. And
Mhm.
so we pick up the things like the GMP inspections or, just the supervisor, inspecting or whatever, and it didn't get picked up on. So that's a great point because you can include that in there. So I'm so glad you mentioned turtle diagrams because that's a great tool as well. I love to use a turtle diagram, especially, and even really until talking to you yesterday, I hadn't even really thought about it as a problem solving tool. I had always used it as an audit tool, but
Mhm.
that's a great idea to pull it out when you're doing your root cause.
Right.
Um, yeah, absolutely. So then the last why there was based off of, why the system allowed it to happen. And so, again, this is another reason why I like to do a 5 why 3 ways, because a lot of people jump straight to well, we didn't have a procedure for that. So if we do the 5 why 3 ways, why the system allowed it to happen, will let us pick up on a lot of that documentation and records and procedures and things. So we really, for me, a 5 why 3 ways kind of just explores everything. And it gives you multiple things to look at. So in this case, I just, said, well, the dock door chains weren't included in the PM. The PM was based on the door supplier recommendation. And then why was that? Was because the PM, coming from the supplier was, here's what you normally do. But really it wasn't site specific. So, if you work in a environment that's dirty and dusty and, there's a lot of opportunity there, then you would want to go above and beyond just the, recommended preventive maintenance from the supplier. So anything more to add on 5 why before we kind of move on?
Nope, I think we covered it pretty well.
And again, not every problem lends itself to a 5 why. There are some that, maybe a fishbone diagram's more, more applicable. I did put some common mistakes up here. As Jennifer alluded to earlier, you know, you don't have to go to 5. But also if it does need to go to 5, then, keep going. But then not stopping early enough sometimes. So making sure we don't stop too early, but also that we don't drag it out. Because I don't know about you, Jennifer, but I think pretty much every problem I could eventually get around to where I'm blaming lack of resources, money, or lack of, management commitment. That's another one I see. People want to take it all the way to, well, we don't have money. That, I could do a lot of things if I had enough money, right? Absolutely. So don't stop too early, but also stop early enough when you should. Playing the blame game, making sure that you get to something that you can action, at the end of the day. And so if you do take it to where management commitment or lack of money, you're not going to like suddenly get money or suddenly get management commitment. So just, don't play the blame game, and then not including the right people. So if you were doing a problem solving activity, Jennifer, who are the people you're going to identify and find out?
Again, I would look at what the problem was and get the right resources there. So if it's a PM issue with maintenance, then you want to have maintenance there. If it's production issue, you want to have production people there. So making sure you have the right people in place to actually solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my favorite people to put on problem solving teams as well is somebody that knows nothing about the process. Uh, you know, uh,
And for the
HR
wild
managers.
card.
Yeah, get that wild card out there. I love HR managers because, they go into it with, they know nothing about the manufacturing process typically. So their eyes are wide open. And I love when they get out there and they start going, why are you doing that? What's that for? And they're asking great questions that we take advantage, or we take for uh uh we just take it that everybody knows the answer to. So, it's great to get that fresh set of eyes for sure.
Right, and one I hate, and when I worked in manufacturing, oh, we tried that before, it didn't work. And it's like, well, maybe that was 10 years ago, and what's changed since then? And really trying to understand, do you have a good idea that's not feasible, or is it feasible now because you have different resources, different equipment, or whatever?
Exactly. And my favorite response to that one is when they say that we've tried that before, I'll say, you know what? We're still going to be talking about this same issue 10 years from now if you don't try something different.
Right.
So let's just, keep trying over and over again till we get it right. So yeah, I hate that one too. That one makes me cringe. All right, corrective action implementation. So let's talk about that. So at SQFI, we talk about three different types of action. So correction is the first one. That's the action taken to eliminate the nonconformity. So typically it's immediate. One of my favorite examples to use is a hose on the floor. So you see a hose on the floor, you pick it up. That's the correction. And then the corrective action is when we eliminate the cause of the nonconformity. So why was the hose on the floor? And, in the example I use all the time is that it was a safety issue to retract the hose. And so the hose reel wasn't in the right place. So we moved the hose reel to the point of use. And so that was our corrective action. And that's completed after you do your root cause analysis. And then preventive action is where you look at all the other hose reels in the building and you determine if you have the potential for the same issue. So preventive action is proactive response to something that hasn't happened, but has the potential to occur. So I don't know about you, Jennifer, but I find that some of these terms sometimes mean different things to different people. And we often find people putting corrective actions in the preventive action and not really understanding that a correction is just a correction, and that they're not going to eliminate that from happening again. So how can we get the word out to people to, understand that a correction is just a correction and it really hasn't fixed their problem, right?
Right, and I think that correction is easily understood, but as you begin to look at, different standards, there's a little bit of blurring between corrective action and preventive action. And it's really just clearly understanding, SQF, and that's the standard you're certifying to, and what those terms mean to you. It doesn't matter that you might have been a different, certification in a previous life. It's where you are today and what what those terms mean.
Yeah, absolutely. For edition 10 too, we'll be looking at all of our different definitions and how we're mentioning and talking about root cause and corrective action process throughout the code. So hopefully we'll make it clearer for the future so people can get a good understanding of what, is required.
Right.
So going back to our dock door, it was open about an inch, and so we need to fix that. I brought our 3 root causes over, and we've got a root cause for occurrence. The chain contained those dirt particles. So if we're going to correct that, we're going to clean that chain, and we're going to close the door. Um, and I don't know, for me, corrections are almost instinctive sometimes. An auditor points something out during an audit and somebody goes over and fixes it, right? And I don't know, you've been an auditor before, Jennifer. So when people aren't doing those corrections, you find a hose on the floor and you kind of point it out and somebody doesn't go over and pick it up. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
It begins to plant a seed in my head of what is the culture here? What, is food safety important? So, when you're out there doing the audit, you're taking in a lot of information and you're observing and you're looking and you're interviewing and talking and you're pulling all this information together and you just use that to help make a decision about the status of the entire program. So when I see, like you're saying, that you're pointing something out and they're not taking care of it, what is the real culture here?
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up food safety culture because, you know, typically you're not going to get to a root cause of food safety culture.
Right.
Um, that kind of just seems so vague, but I mean, honestly, we should talk about food safety culture and how it impacts really, everything we do, including CAPA. It is a food safety culture issue in some cases. We do have a question in the chat about this. In this situation, would you start looking at this issue as a management commitment issue?
Um, in my experience, if it's a onesie or twosie, then no. But if I'm seeing multiple examples of it, then I'll begin to ask that question, do we have a management commitment issue here? Because, it may be that you're so focused on the audit that it doesn't even occur to you to go over there and pick up the hose. And, we've been in situations, or I've been in situations where my person who is my guide, they're just so nervous because they feel everything is riding on them and they have to be perfect, that they won't even leave your side because they want to hear everything. And it's just how different individuals manage it.
No, yeah, my first time being audited as an SQF practitioner, yeah, and I had the auditor pointed out a hose on the floor and I was like, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I see it. I agree. There's a hose on the floor. And I was so nervous and I was so worried about leaving his side. Would he think bad about me if I went over there and picked up the hose? Am I not supposed to pick up the hose? Should I pick up the
Mm.
hose? So I was, my head was going da 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 da. And then finally I was like, okay, Tammy, pick up the hose. Just pick up the
Right.
hose, and so yeah, it can be very nerve-wracking for especially first-time practitioners that are not sure what to do. So here's our
Right.
advice.
Yeah, and in my situation or my auditing world, that if I notice something and I pointed it out, it is quite all right for you to say, "Can I just have a minute?" in a moment, and you can direct somebody else to go take care of it or make a phone call or deal with it yourself. Because in my opinion, we, even though we're supposed to spend 50% of our time out in the manufacturing floor, that the more time we spend out there, the better understanding we have of how well your processes work. So if you have to step away for just a moment or so to take care of something, it's not a hardship.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. I mean, the just because you're having an audit doesn't mean your business stops.
Right.
So sometimes you do need to take a moment and just say to the auditor, I was in an audit one time and the power flickered. And for those of you that work in a bakery or a facility where when the power even flickers, that's a crisis. We've got all these ovens that have products that within a few minutes are going to be burning, flames. And so the plant manager and I were both sitting in front of the auditor and we both stood up and then we both sat down. And the auditor said, "Oh, no, I understand. You need to go." And we were like, "We'll be right back," and we ran out to deal with it. So, auditors understand you have a business. And if you need to step away to take care of something or to address something that they identified, the auditors are going to look more favorably, on that situation than if you just let the hose sit there on the floor.
Right.
So, Jennifer and I say, pick up the hose,
And
or
life, I was gonna say, life happens during audits. It doesn't stop because your auditor's there. And, Tammy, to your story, I was down in North Carolina going in for day 2 of an audit, and I'm standing in the lobby and my phone rings and it's my client saying, he's like, "Well, Miss Jennifer, can you leave the building? We're on fire." So it was a paper mill that was making napkins and paper towels and such. And I had to leave the building because there was a fire in the building, and you just kind of roll with the punches and you do what you can do and make sure that you can do what needs to be done to complete the audit.
absolutely. And in your example, communication is key.
Yes.
You know, communicate what's going on and it'll all be all right, in the
Mhm.
end. The
Exactly.
audit will get finished and it'll all be all right. So, absolutely. So great examples, great discussion. Let's see, we have a couple more questions in the chat. So I know a lot of people are very interested if they're going to get this webinar. And so we do make our webinars available. They are posted to our website after we finish, and they are also typically on our YouTube channel. Jennifer, did you know that SQFI has a YouTube channel?
I did know that.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of great videos. If you haven't watched them, some of them are oldies but goodies. So, definitely check that out. But we do post all of our webinars on our website, and then a lot of them do go on over to our YouTube channel. So that takes care of several here. Let me go scroll on down. Uh, Okay, Ethan, yes. I was going to say that and then I got distracted. So, as an auditor, would you recommend at a large facility for your guide to have a second person to be a runner to help with corrections in these moments? So, what's your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
I think that that is an excellent thing to have. And if you have the resources available, then it's always good to have somebody there to back you up. Even just to have a conversation with the auditor if you have to step away for a few minutes. So that, we're not being left alone, but it's okay to leave us alone too. We always have documents and things we can update in our report that we need to capture if you need to step away for a few minutes. But having a secondary person to be there is always a good idea.
And I think to me, having a second person there also, goes a long way toward commitment. So, understanding that, you all are taking the audit seriously and that you're committing the resources, to be there to support that audit. That's great. I think it's a great idea.
Mhm.
So, we've got another question. Can an auditor judge the plant and mark a nonconformance based on any emergency situation happening during the audit? So you had a
Again,
fire during the audit. So what
I
happened?
think the answer to this question lies in what is the emergency? If it's food safety related and you're not taking care of the food safety related issue, then yes. If it's non-food safety related and you're like in my case, when there was a fire, what I'm thinking is how quickly will the fire in that dumpster be put out? And will I be able to spend enough time on site to meet the minimum requirements for the audit to be completed? So we have to take them individually and understand what's happening. And then a conversation will always be had. There would be no surprise for you about what the outcome of the emergency situation is. It may be that I'm going to have to extend and come back for a few hours or however many hours, the next day, but we'll have that conversation with you and make sure that we're all in agreement on the best way to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said several times, things do happen. And so I'm thinking back to last year, I think it was, we received an email from an anonymous source during a site's SQF audit. The auditor was on site, and whoever was sending us the email, they said, we're having our SQF audit, and we've had an allergen contamination issue, and we're trying to hide it from the auditor. We're trying to steer the auditor away from that area, and I don't think we should be doing that. And I mean, I agree with the anonymous person. I mean, there's an action plan. You have it built into your food safety system, how you deal with that type of issue. So the fact that you had an issue is not the issue. It's the response to the issue and making sure you're following your procedures on how to deal with that. So trying to hide that stuff from the auditor, I mean, there's really not a reason, because the auditor's not going to write you up because you had a contamination issue, unless you're not dealing with it, as Jennifer alluded to earlier. If you're not addressing it, then absolutely that could be a non-conformance. But yeah, because they see you, putting product on hold and cleaning the line, that's not going to be a non-conformance because you're following your program and doing what needs to be done. So great question.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, making sure that you're doing what your food safety plan and your food safety management system says you do. Make that correction, put product on hold, segregate, and do such things. And we understand that life happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a question, and this is a question that we get often. It's a frequently asked question. If the corrective action takes place immediately after the auditor points out the problem, is it still a non-conformance?
Yes. It is still a non-conformance. What we typically do, if you're able to close it out effectively during the audit, we will note in the report that there was effective corrective action put in place, but we still want to see what that preventive action is. So you can make the correction, you can take corrective action, but there's still the preventive action piece that you'll need to demonstrate and show to us so that we can add it to the report and make sure there's full closure.
Absolutely. So agreed 100%. Just because you picked up the hose doesn't mean that it wasn't a non-conformance to begin with. And I know that's such a simple example, but it's one that does help to kind of help people to understand the difference between all those types of actions. All right, so we've got some more questions. So let me take a look. Oh, here's a question in general about auditing. We have a site that's in the early stages of preparing for their audit. We are an ice cream facility, and is it 100% necessary to have foreign object detection device to pass SQF certification? Well, so I'm going to give out an answer that we say a lot. It depends. So, there's the SQF code does not say it's mandatory that you have a metal detector. What we say is you're required to have a program for foreign material contamination. So we would be looking to see if you've done that risk assessment, that hazard analysis, identified those hazards, and put actions in place to address those hazards. So, but some of you may have customers out there that require certain foreign detection equipment. So you have to adhere to customer requirements. SQF auditors looking at that. In some cases, it might even be a regulatory requirement. And so you have to adhere to everything. And that's really what the auditor is going to be looking at. Jennifer, do you have any more thoughts on that?
You know, I 100% agree with your points there, Tammy. And I want to add that if your customer requires that you have metal detection and you've taken the decision not to do it, when we do that addendum for the customer, and you know, let's be honest, we're talking about Costco, they require it.
Somebody
when-
posted it in the chat, pointed that out.
Look, so when we're looking at that, you will end up with a finding against your system for not meeting customer expectations. So not only is it a finding that for metal detection not being in place on Costco, you're going to have an SQF finding for not meeting customer expectations. And when that occurs, many of our clients get upset about it. And it's just, I think it's just good to say these things are interrelated and they go hand in hand. And one of the things when I'm talking about food safety management systems that I like to say is that FSMS is like a big old bowl of spaghetti, Tammy. I might be talking about, you know, your KPIs in the very beginning and clause, the very first clauses, and all of a sudden you're not meeting a KPI, and I'm going to go right to corrective action and say, so what are you doing about this? What's your corrective action? How are you fixing it? And that noodle just kind of wraps itself around the standard and touches in many different places. And it's important to keep that in mind about how it's all interrelated.
Yeah, and that's why I like a turtle diagram, because that turtle diagram will point out all those interrelationships between the different requirements. So, you know, and SQF is really focused on teaching our auditors that it's not about a checklist audit. So we are more and more emphasizing you don't start at 2.1.1 and go all the way to the end. You follow those spaghetti noodles is what you do. So it's so important that sites understand the interconnectedness of everything because the auditor should be jumping around and taking off on those different audit trails. So, okay, so we have another question. The standard group, both corrective action and preventive action, when you look at the definition and the clause in the standard, do I need to submit both a corrective action and a preventative action on the portal for the NC identified in the certification audit? So for me, the problem-solving process is not complete unless you've considered corrective and preventive action. Although I do know in our database, we have one box for everything to go into. So corrections, corrective action, preventive action, it all goes into one spot. But what are your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
I'm in agreement with you. We can't close a finding out if there's only a correction in place. And so we need to see all three aspects of it. And when you provide that objective evidence, we're getting that verification piece. So, you know, we're even bringing that verification piece in. So I think it's a very good practice to say correction, corrective action, preventive action. And then maybe with version 10, you can make it more boxes.
That's what I'm hoping. I'm lobbying for more boxes because I think it would be easier for sites to see the difference between those and the auditor to review the information. So I think that's a great suggestion. Let's go ahead and just quickly finish up our scenario here, and then we'll move to the next slide, and then we'll go through the rest of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So, you know, in this case, we've got corrections, close the door, clean the chain, you know, corrective actions, you know, update that PM for that chain to be inspected and cleaned monthly. Update maybe your warehouse operating procedure. So maybe you do require a visual check of the door being sealed before you walk away. So maybe that's a possibility. And then those preventive actions, you know, maybe you have some other pieces of equipment that you need to consider. that maybe your PM's not effective enough on it. And then of course you wouldn't want to look at all your doors. I mean, I worked in a facility, I think we had, almost 40 dock doors. And so, so that's the problem with doing a correction. We only look at that dock door. We fix that dock door. And so getting into that preventive action where we look at all of them to see if they also have the same problem. So let's move to the next slide. And then we have just a few more questions to answer. So key takeaways from today, if you're an auditor, and I know we have a few of them on here, challenge the sites with their root cause and their HACCP reviews. So we've talked about hazard analysis and, and again, all that interconnectedness. So making sure that you are challenging sites to identify those hazards and, develop those root causes. If you're a site leader, you're a plant manager on here, understand the importance of the CAPA process. It's not a practitioner job. It is not a quality function. It is a site function. And it is so important that as site leaders, you understand that importance and you support it. And then if you're a practitioner, make sure you develop that robust CAPA program. And please get outside training. If some of what we've said today, you're hearing it for the first time, maybe you do need a good root cause class. And I know there are lots out there and several available through SGS or through SQFI that could assist with just giving you a better picture and understanding of root cause and corrective action. So for sure, check that out. So, all right, so let's go back to the chat here. All right, so we have a person that is writing their corrective actions. And what can they do if they don't have an exact day of completed action? Can I select an approximation, or what else can I do in these cases? So I'm not sure if you're saying that it's completed and you're not sure exactly what day it's completed, or if you're saying it's not complete and you don't know when it's going to be complete. So I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to address both of those. What date should they put in? Does it matter?
I think that the date of completion should be the approximate date of completion. So if you don't know if it was a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, then I think it's okay to say I think it was completed around 11/5/2024. And when we audit, we're going to look at the objective evidence. We're going to see if after the date you said it was completed, has the problem not reoccurred and that you've done a good job. We're not going to be like, really a stickler for the exact date and time, but we're going to want to see that your system's working the way you intended to work. So if it's not completed yet, then I think you need to clearly document that it's still open and expected completion is. And if you have a process within your system to ask for an extension, then ask for an extension to close that corrective action. Because if you're supposed to do it within 14 days and you're now on day 16 and nothing is documented about asking for an extension, it's going to raise a red flag, which it should, internally and externally in an audit.
Absolutely. I had a situation where I had a non-conformance because we had a dock pad that was in really bad shape. And so I got a non-conformance at our SQF audit for that dock pad. And when we went to order a new dock pad, it was going to take 6 weeks. So obviously, you have 30 days to close those things out. And so I'm on the phone with this poor dock pad supplier, and I'm like, oh no, you don't understand. I need it here and and implemented in less than 30 days. And so they were able to get it to me, but at that point I didn't understand. I could have, talked to my CB and explained the situation. And again, going back to that communication piece, it's just all about communication. And I agree with you. If it happened today and I put on tomorrow's date, I'm not gonna get hung up over that, of you being off a day or two,
Right.
as long as it's complete, making sure it's complete.
And I think it's important, Tammy, to say that if you're asking for an extension, you have to clearly define how you're mitigating the risk while you're waiting for the correction to occur. So we were talking about roof leaks. So maybe you have drums with the funnels and the hoses coming down to collect the water and it's staying in one place. And the drums are being emptied and cleaned and the whole process you're doing to make sure the floor is not wet and you don't have a risk of, wetness and the bacteria associated with water on the floor.
Absolutely. So, yeah, as long as you have a plan to mitigate
Mm.
it until you get it completed, which is a good lead into the next one. So the next question is, if you have a correction in process, so let's say you're waiting on a part, why would it still be a non-conformance during the audit? And I think,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, I think that speaks to what we've been talking to. If
Mhm.
you have a plan in place on how you're mitigating that, it shouldn't be a non-conformance, right?
Right.
So,
If you
yeah,
don't have a plan and you're just waiting for the part, that's a horse of a different color.
that's right. And it's probably a non-conformance.
Right.
So, okay, next question. So somebody was giving advice to someone on the metal detector, I think. Great. So yeah, so mitigating that hazard, if you don't have a metal detector, if you've identified metal as a hazard, then you have to have something in place, whether it's a metal detector or other
Right.
program to mitigate that issue.
It could be magnets if they're ferrous, it could be sieves, at the right, diameter, size. There's more than metal detectors that can help mitigate foreign materials.
Exactly. So we've got a question. Is root cause evidence and action evidence the same? So root cause evidence and corrective action evidence, are they the same?
It
I,
depends on your
I,
definition. That's an interesting question. Um,
I don't find too often people ask for, so for me, root cause evidence would be that 5Y or that fishbone diagram. So I think maybe they're meaning evidence of the root cause process and
mhm.
not necessarily evidence that you got the right root cause, maybe is the way I kind of read it. And then the corrective action evidence is, how are you proving to the auditor that you did what you said you did? And so if you said you updated a procedure, then you should be giving them the updated procedure. If you
And the
say,
training, and the
and
training to the
training,
new
that goes along with
procedure.
exactly. Or if you had to tear down a wall, then you should show a picture of the wall being removed. So, and that's the corrective action I had one time. We removed a wall. So, so a picture of the wall may be what, that is needed for corrective action. Okay. So we've got somebody that says, to me, your corrective action and your preventive action, your corrective action is your preventive action. There are times that this becomes too repetitive, your thoughts.
I agree and disagree. How's that? So your corrective action is the action you're taking at that point for that issue. Preventive action is what you're doing to make sure it never occurs again. So in my experience, I was auditing a company that made dry flavors. And they had white bags that they were going from the spray dryer into the white bag and putting it in a fiber drum and shipping it that way. Well, their can liners were also white bags. So you know what happened. A client got some barbecue flavor with trash in the bottom of the bag because someone grabbed it back and there was just a confusion there. So, their corrective action was to change the bag and make sure that it was a different color bag that was going to be a can liner. But their preventive action was to spread it throughout all the processes within their whole organization. So now all the dry flavors and flavors went into clear bags instead of white bags, and they would never have that issue again. If they just stuck to, dryer 14 where the problem was, then it could have reoccurred. And when you were talking about your corrective action is not effective then, right? So I think that depending on what the actions are, it could be if it's happening at one place and one place only, your corrective action might be your preventive action, but oftentimes we find it's much bigger than that.
Exactly. And, and I always, as you said, Corrective action is for that situation, that issue that has already happened. And then preventive is where you're looking at the bigger picture. Where else could I have this same problem? And I'm looking at places where there is the potential for it to occur. So you will probably take the exact same action, just like your example there was your corrective action was clear bags, and then your preventive action was clear bags, but those clear bags were on places where it hadn't happened yet. So your actions may be the same action, but it's happening in different places. So I agree with you, Jennifer. It, could be, but maybe not, So, all right. So I think we've got time for one more question. If you're doing corrective action inside your company, what happens if you reach a due date for a corrective action and it's not done? Is it okay for the team to extend? And how long is it too long for a corrective action to be open? So they're not talking about their external. They're talking about, let's say, their internal audit or some other corrective action internally that they've raised. What happens if it doesn't get done by the due date? Can they extend it internally? What are you looking for as an auditor?
As an auditor, I'm looking at what your procedure says that you can do. And you hear this all the time in food safety management systems. It is risk-based. So if it's a critical issue, if it's something that's going to cause extreme harm and we're calling it critical, then extensions should be very limited and not offered. If it's a minor nonconformity, then you may have the ability to extend it a greater length of time. But it's case by case again, and it's what your procedure allows you to do. And
Exactly.
documenting that you're asking for the extension and the reason why.
Yeah, because an auditor is going to question if he just keeps saying seeing a date changed and there's no documentation as to why it was changed. Again, it comes down to communication. So whether it's written communication or verbal, just communicate those changes and what you need to do. Okay, well, that is all of our questions. Although there is one question that I think will be answered on the next slide here. Someone was asking for a contact at SGS about one of their audits. So
Right.
Jennifer's email address is on the screen there. My email address is there as well. So either person can probably answer your question as to who you need to go to ask a question about your most recent audit. So please look that out. We also have the SGS. They have a survey that they would like for you to take today. So you can use the QR code, or we have posted that in the chat and you can get to that link from there. So thank you all so much for hanging with us today. And I hope you all enjoyed our discussion on what to do after your audit. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.